Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to continue to work on YelpCamp, but we're not going to add any new features or functionality. We're just going to refactor existing code. So I've been talking about refactoring the routes and our app.js for a long time, and it's just grown more and more out of control, and we have enough code here that it warrants refactoring it. And we're going to focus on the routes. So let me just highlight the different groups of routes that we have. Right now, we have our authentication routes, about 40 something lines here. Then we have the comment routes right there. And then we also have our campground routes that go another 40 or so lines here. So those are the three main groups of routes that we have. And we're going to split them out into three different files and then require all of them. So we'll have a require up here that looks like var comment routes equals require, and we'll have a routes directory / comments. So then we'll need to make that work. It won't work right now. And we'll do the same thing for campground and for auth routes. And that's just the first part, splitting things into different files. And then I'm going to show you another way we can dry up our routes even more and to make things a little bit cleaner using the express router. So we'll get to that. But I'm going to begin by making a routes directory. And I'm working inside of v7 at this point because we're making substantial changes to the application structure and the directories. So it would be pretty confusing if I didn't make a new version. We're going to make a directory called routes, and then we'll make three different files. Routes / campgrounds.js, routes / comments.js, and routes / and we could either call this auth.js, or we could call it index, which is another one you'll see often for the all-purpose routes that aren't related to a particular model. And I'll go with that for now, index.js. So let's open those up. And if we do C9 on a directory, it will open all three of them up here. And then we can just click on the ones that we want. So we now have this little subtree that we favorited. Let's start by working with campgrounds. We'll open that up. And I'm just going to copy all the campground routes out of here. So that starts right here. And that goes down until our comment routes right there. And let's paste that into campgrounds. And it's not just going to work automatically out of the box. We will have to change some things. But let's start by just splitting the files up. So next, I'll work with the comments. And we only have two comment routes for now. So I'll take both of those, put them in this file. Lastly, we'll open up the index.js and we'll add the other routes. So we have our root route and then the authentication routes as well, down to here. And I'm going to take this is logged in along with us, and we will be refactoring that separately, but that belongs with the authentication routes because that's where we're using it. And it's also a dependency of the comment routes because we're using is logged in here as well. So let's copy all of that in. So is logged in all the way up, all the routes, including the root route. And now we've really cleaned up the app.js file. Let's paste that into index.js and save. And we're getting errors all over the place because our files don't know what app is referring to. As you can see, that's one of the problems we're running into. But we're not actually going to declare a variable app like we would in the app.js where we do var app equals express. We're going to do something slightly different. We're going to use the express router. And let me show you what that looks like to start. We're going to require express up here. var express equals require express. And then we're going to write var router equals express dot router. And then we're going to add all the routes onto router rather than app. And I'm going to do this first just to show you, and then I'll explain why this is even worth doing. So we'll do that. And then of course we have to export something from this file, and all that we need to export is router. So module.exports equals router. So we've created this router variable equal to express.router, basically a new instance of the express router. And then we're adding all the routes to the router, no longer adding them to the app itself, but to this router. And then we're returning or exporting the router at the very end. And this is campgrounds.js. And if I go to my app.js, I'm going to start by requiring all my route files. So I'll do that separately from the other dependencies. So var comment routes, and then we'll have campground routes equals require dot slash routes slash campgrounds. And then we also have auth, and we'll do auth routes equals, and I'll group these together nicely. Whoops. Just like this. Okay, require dot slash routes slash index. And we can call this index routes if we want to. Okay, so we'll save that. We're now importing or requiring those 3 files, but that's not enough for us to actually be using them just yet. We've required the files, and only one of them, by the way, is actually exporting anything. The comments and the index.js are still problematic. But if we go back to app.js, we need to write an app.use. So I'm just going to do this down here, and I'll show you what it looks like first. App.use, and then we need to give it the name of our routes that we required. So comment routes, campground routes, and index routes. So we'll do that. So we'll start with index routes, and then another app.use, comment routes, and then another one, app.use, campground routes. And that tells our app to use those 3 route files that we've required. Right now, only campground.js actually is set up correctly. So let's finish off with the other ones, comments.js, and we'll change all of those app dot to be router dot. And then at the very bottom, we do module.exports equals router and save. But we still have some problems. As you can see, is logged in. We need to define that. Campground isn't defined. And this is also complaining that campground isn't defined. So we need to make sure we're adding in the correct models as well. So up here, we'll just do another var, and let's start with campground equals require, and we need to get the correct file path. So right now we're inside the routes directory, and we need to go inside the models directory, campground.js. So we need to do dot dot slash models slash campground, and then we'll also import comments, and that needs to be models slash comment. Those are the 2 models we want to require here, and we'll save. But we still have this issue of is logged in, and to start, I'm just going to copy the code of is logged in. So it's at the bottom of this one. So I'll copy that into both places. So we'll keep it in our index routes, but we're also going to add it to our comments route, and just put that at the bottom for now, and save. And now that error goes away, and we're error free. We're good to go in this file. Now let's address our index.js, where there's a little bit more to worry about, because we're using some other code that's going to throw up some issues. So we need to start with our code that requires express, and then it creates the express router. Just copy it over here. Paste that in. And then we'll change all of these apps to be router.get, router.post. Just like that. And save. But we have a problem. It's complaining that passport isn't defined. And that's because it's not defined. So all we need to do is a var passport equals require passport. And we're almost there, but we also have a problem where user isn't defined. So we need to define user. So var user equals require dot dot slash models slash user. So you'll probably notice that in order for us to break things up into these separate files and keep our app.js nice and clean, it does mean that we have to require things a little bit more often. And that's the one downside. It's a little bit more code to require things, but in the long term, it makes a lot more sense to break our code out like this, keep things organized, have some order and structure to our app, and it might mean an extra line or two here, but it keeps our app.js file nice and short. Okay, so if we try and test this out right now, we have our 3 routes that we're requiring. All of these files are now set up where they have the important dependencies required, the models, the express and express router, and then we're exporting at the bottom of all of them, although we're not doing it on this one, which we need to do on index.js, module.exports equals router. Now if we try and start the app, let's see if we get any errors. It looks good. Let's test it out. So we'll go to the route path to start. That route is working. View all the campgrounds. We have a problem here because we didn't define campground inside of the campgrounds route. So we need to open that up, campground.js, and just add in our var campground equals require ... models/campground, just like we did in the other files. Make sure there are no other errors in here. It looks good. Restart the server and try it out again. Now we're good to go. So we're viewing the show page. Let's go back, try and log in. Great. Severus, password. And it all works just fine, which is great. There's actually a bigger change we can make to dry up our code a little bit. And it has to do with this line right here, or these 3 lines actually, where we're doing app.use index routes, campground routes, and comment routes. What we can do is shorten the route declarations. So let's take an example of comment routes. In comment.js, the 2 routes that we have all start with campgrounds/id/comments. Campgrounds/id/comments. And then we have /new on the end of one of them. Or in the campground routes page, if I open that up, you can see that they all start with /campgrounds. And we can actually reduce that duplication when we require them in our app.js. So let's start with campground. I can say all campground routes should start with /campgrounds. And we'll take all of these campground.js routes that we've defined, these routes here, and append /campgrounds in front of them. So if we're going to make this change, we then need to go to our campground.js file and get rid of all /campgrounds. So the index now to show all campgrounds is just /. The create is just /. Our new is just /new. Our show is just /id. And that's all we have. So we'll save. And what that does again is it takes campground routes, all these routes we defined in that file, and it appends /campgrounds in front of them. So it helps us clean up the code. And we can do the same thing, although for our index routes, there is nothing in common that we want to stick in front of them. So we can just leave it how it is, or we can just say they all start with / if we want to have them all match this pattern, where we provide the string first. And let's just test that out. Start the server up. Refresh on the campgrounds page, which is now working even though the route itself, if we go to campground.js, the index route is just /. It's actually /campgrounds because of this line right here. So comment routes, it's a little bit more complicated because they all start with /campground /:id/comments. And then we can go to the comment file, comment.js routes, and change all of these so that this is only /new, and this is just /. So we've shortened up the routes a lot, and we've grouped things into these ideas, these topics, so that all the campground routes start with /campgrounds, and we can write shorter route declarations. And that's especially true with comments, where we don't have to supply this long prefix here. But there is a problem. If we save, make sure we save the comment file, and go back and restart, and refresh, and we go to one of the comment routes, like add a new comment. First, I'm going to have to log in, of course. So I'll log in as Severus and try that again. And now I try and add a comment. We have a problem. And it's hard to tell what the problem is from this error, which is always frustrating. But it says cannot read property name of null. And it's pointing to this line right here, campground.name. So from that error, we can garner that campground is null, which means that it's not finding our campground in the database, because inside of this comment route, when we create a new comment, the first thing it does is find a campground by the ID. And what's happening is that our ID is actually not being found. So we can prove that by doing a console.log request.params.id. And let's start the server over. And this was working just fine until we moved those routes and we used this express router like this, where we specified that all comment routes start with this, where we did add :ID, but if we try it out and we refresh and we look here, before this long arrow was printed out, we can see null was printed. So it's not finding the ID. What's happening is that our ID, our :ID route parameter, isn't making it through to our comment routes. And there's a really easy fix. When we use the express router in this file, we pass in an option inside of an object, merge params true. And that will then merge the params from the campground and the comments together so that inside the comment routes, we're able to access this :ID that we defined. So let's restart now. Node app.js. If we refresh right now, we'll need to go back /campgrounds. Refresh. I'll have to log back in as Severus, password. Then let's go and try and add a comment. And you can see that it works now just fine. And we're finding that ID, and then we're finding the correct campground. So we don't have a problem. Okay, so we successfully refactored the routes. The last thing we could really focus on is cleaning some other code up. So we could go into our comments file, for instance, and we don't need to say comment routes here anymore. But if we wanted to, let's go in and add these semicolons, and we'll also just add a little message before each route. So this is the comments new, and then this is comments create, and we'll save. Make sure everything's formatted nicely. You can get rid of that. We still have this is logged in. I'll just add a message here, middleware, that we will be refactoring and moving to its own file that will then require inside the comments file and our index.js file because we have it in both places. Let's make sure we have some comments here. So this is the root route. This is our register form route. This handles the sign up logic route. This is our login form route. This handles the login forms logic and actually does the logging in. And this is the log out route. And then we have our middleware here. All right, and then lastly, let's go to campground.js. We have our index route, our create route, and our new route, and our show. Great. And app.js, let's see if there's anything else we can really clean up in here. Let's go ahead and add a comment in here where we write requiring routes. And otherwise, we're good to go. So we changed a lot of things around as far as the files and the directories, but our logic is exactly the same. Really, the biggest change, aside from moving things into different files, was showing this use of the express router, where we can require route files. And in our case, our route files are exporting the router that we're using. And that doesn't have to be called router, but that's the conventional name. So whatever we named it here, we just need to reference and add the .gets and .posts onto that object, and then send that out at the very bottom. And we can provide this prefix that will be added in front of every single route in that file. Great, so we really cleaned things up. And just to show you how much, we have 46 lines in this app.js. In the previous version, if we open up app.js, we had 177 lines. So that's a pretty drastic reduction.